Let's begin. A very good afternoon, everyone. A big Hayes Education hello to our virtual leadership seminar, Hope on the Horizon, with the fabulous, there they are, in the little screen in the middle, we've got Hywel Roberts and Dr. Debra Kidd, hello, and we'll switch on their microphones very, very soon. I'm Paul Mathias, I'm National Director at Hayes Education. In addition to recruitment, I just wanted to share with you over the next minute or so some ways that we're supporting school leaders. And one of these is around staff training. And back in March, we launched our Hayes Education staff training platform. This is completely free of charge for schools up and down the country. And it allows you to upload existing courses, to create new courses, to create interactive inset sessions, and also to share key documents with staff. All of this, most importantly, has got full management information. The platform also includes 20 free staff wellbeing courses, and I'm delighted to say that since we launched back in March, we now have more than 5,000 schools and over 200,000 school staff using the platform. And just to supplement this, and in addition to all that we're doing on staff wellbeing, delighted to announce that this week we launched our Wellbeing in Education Report 2020. Back in October, we surveyed over 800 teachers and school leaders, and we've collated all of that into a report. That's available via your local consultant, in addition to more information about the training platform, or, as you can see there on the screen, please just email me at paulmathias@hayes.com, and I can send you more information. Right then, back to today's session, which will be running for circa 90 minutes. And just a reminder that we have a follow-up session, and the follow-up session is going to be on Monday the 30th of November at 4 o'clock, hopefully inspired by a lot of questions that will be raised on today's session. So what we're asking for that is, if you have any questions at all that come up during the session, please put those into the chat box. We'll collate all of those, and then we'll have an interactive session going through all those questions on the 30th of November. But also, if after the event you think of questions, please email me, as you can see there, paulmathias@hayes.com, with those questions, and that will form part of that interactive session that we have on the 30th of November. So I've now got the absolute pleasure. I've worked with them before on the sessions we've done up and down the country, so this is a bit different as an interactive session. An absolute pleasure to introduce Debra and Hywel. Despite their youthful appearance, did you write this, Hywel? You did, yes, you did. They've got over 50 years experience working in education between them. They both, and we were talking about this earlier, they both started out as teachers of English and drama. Hywel is still very hands-on in the classroom, and he works with many universities, but also leads the PGCE programme in drama at Huddersfield. Dr. Debra Kidd is Associate for the Royal Society of Arts. She founded Northern Rocks, and she delivers CPD and training internationally. I'm sure you would have heard about their books, Hywel's award-winning book, Oops, Getting Children Learning Accidentally, and also Debra's latest book, which I'm sure she'll talk about, is A Curriculum of Hope. So you're in for a real treat. Have a great afternoon, and I'll pass you now on to Hywel and Debra. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Paul. That was a lovely introduction, wasn't it, to what we're trying to do this afternoon. And a really big thank you to Hayes for the invitation to just share our work, really. And Debra and I are really keen, really, to start looking ahead. We know how busy everything is at the moment. We know how under pressure schools are for not just the kids, not just the teachers, but particularly for the leaders. And what we wanted to do was offer a session that, in the spirit of supporting you and being helpful, really, and really getting back to the core business and thinking about what's going to happen in post-COVID times, I guess, and going back to the core business. We've got a lot of things to share tonight, and that, the sort of nature of this webinar is here's some stuff. And then, as Paul has said, on the 30th, we're going to come back and it'll be a little bit more interactive. So do please use the Q&A, the chat feature on this platform. If you've got any questions, rather than just try and remember it to email Paul tomorrow, just bung it into the chat and we'll get to see that, and we'll be able to prepare them something for the 30th. So without further ado, I just want to say it though, we'd rather be with you. We'd rather be in the room with you, wouldn't we? We would. So we'd rather be there. But what we're going to do, and I hope you'll go in the spirit of this, is we're just going to share this stuff with you. And hopefully by the end of the session, you've got some stuff to go away and mumble about to yourself, and then go and have a few murmurs with a couple of your team back in school.
I think we don't want to dwell on what's happening at the moment. We don't want to dwell on the COVID situation at all. But if we were looking for positive signposts coming out of this, apart from the fact that we're all a heck of a lot better with technology than we were perhaps 6 or 7 months ago, I think we can also say that there have been bubbling up some questions around the purpose of education, around how we support young people through their mental health and well-being, as well as their education. Hywel and I were chatting earlier about a Year 3 class I was teaching last week, where we'd gone into role as estate agents, as it happened, and I asked the question, how do grown-ups behave at work or even at home in ways that children don't behave? And I thought they'd say things like they were less playful, more serious, they might mention something about language, but 3 of the children blurted out things that I think perhaps opened my eyes to why it was so important for them to be at school. One was they take a lot of drugs. The second one was they play their Xbox all night and then complain that they're tired in the morning. And the other one that was relatively tame in comparison to that was that they drink 7 cups of coffee and then get in a bad mood. So I think what we, out of the mouths of babes, we get some idea, don't we, of what school needs to do in terms of helping children forward. So we're hoping this is a positive message, we're hoping it's purposeful, and we want to go back to that question. And I guess, you know, again, the current situation we're in has thrown up this question for us to consider in a little bit more detail of why do we send children to school in the first place? I don't know how you felt, but certainly over the last few weeks I've felt that it seems to be for childcare and to keep the economy going. But even in normal circumstances, what is the purpose of education? If we had more time, I'd get you to discuss it and you could put your thoughts into the chat. But is it for tests? Is it to get children through exams? Because the meltdown that I'm seeing from some quarters of the education system about the prospect of exams being cancelled suggests that actually people are starting to believe that if those exams don't happen, there's been no point to the, 12 years of education that children have had until that point, which seems to be a little bit of a sad reflection of where we're up to. Having said that, we all know why we think that, and I don't need to go into too much detail there about the accountability systems and the pressures being put on us. On the other hand, you know, there are people saying, let's get rid of the tests altogether. We just want to focus on children's happiness and creativity, which is well-meaning and well-intentioned. But we all know people in the world who are happy and creative and wreak havoc. We don't have to look too far to some of our political leaders to find examples of that. So perhaps what we want to start thinking about, and certainly what Hywel and I want to start talking about today, is the hope that is inherent in the attempts to change the world, in having the agency to change the world and having the wisdom to make the decisions that will make those changes impactful and positive. So I guess the question that we want you to have running in the backs of your minds as we go through this session this afternoon is, what do we teach and how do we teach if the purpose or focus of our system is to engender wisdom in children? And what is a wise person? I'd say ask Hywel there.
Someone who doesn't tell you that they're wise is my answer.
Yeah. You don't get somebody coming up and saying, hello, I'm wise, but you do sometimes get somebody coming up and going, hello, I've got a first-class honours degree from Oxford University. So an element of humility, perhaps, is important there. We might also talk about multiple perspectives and points of view, being able to see unintended consequences to your actions, being able to learn from experience as well as knowledge. If we started to put those attributes together, we'd start to get perhaps a little bit more of an inkling of the gaps that currently exist in some of the things we're trying to achieve. So I wanted to kind of draw your attention to a little bit of research before we get embedded in stories. And most of today's session is going to be about telling you stories and tales from the classroom. But I wanted you to kind of think about this for a moment, because again, bubbling up from some of the conversations around whether or not we should cancel exams came the accusation that if we did so, children would lose their motivation, that without the exam they'd have no motivation to study. And I wonder if there's any evidence for that. So if we look at some of the research into motivation, and this is an interesting article to go to, you can access it online. It's actually more of a book, and this is just chapter 4 of it. But the research is quite detailed, and it's quite a detailed chapter. And I just wanted to kind of put into a nutshell some of the findings in that chapter, because what I like about it is that it strikes a balance between those binaries between learning should all be about knowledge, and learning should be very structured and scaffolded and sequenced, and the learning should be enjoyable and it should be fun and it should be interesting. It strikes an absolute balance between those two what seem like polarized positions. But what it states very clearly is that what sits at the heart of a child's learning experience is emotion. And that whether children experience that emotion negatively or positively will have a significant impact on how they enjoy their learning, or how they engage with their learning, and also how they memorize their learning. So, for example, some of the negative emotions that are associated with that research are boredom, but also fear, hostility, or fear of hostility, fear of losing face, fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, anger, all those kinds of things that we know we see happening and bubbling up in classrooms. The positive emotions are around enjoyment, and they are around, the F word, fun. But they're also around that kind of sense of satisfaction you get from a job well done, that sense of overcoming a difficulty, a challenge, and having got on the other side of it. So those things, the sense of achievement, is also one of the positive emotions that encourages children to be motivated for the next thing that comes along. So that idea of enjoyment and interest sits very much at the heart of that. And alongside that is the importance of a sense of purpose, the feeling that what you're learning is meaningful, and that it has some kind of context in which you're able to grapple with it and see the usefulness or the application or the interest or challenge within it. We all know, people who do things like Sudoku, who find them very enjoyable and interesting things to do. And we might say, well, that's not necessarily something that's going to change the world, but it keeps people occupied. So the sense of satisfaction you might get from a simple puzzle could give you a sense of purpose. But we're going to go into a little bit more about how we make that purpose a little bit more relevant and meaningful for children. That kind of then leads into three things that are very closely connected. The importance of self-regulation, the importance of children being able to feel that they've got some sense of direction and some sense of ownership over what they're doing. And that self-regulation demands an element of independence. So over-scaffolding, over-supporting, spoon-feeding children actually creates a sense of learned helplessness, and that can inhibit progress and inhibit motivation. Whereas if we set them goals, we set them strategies, we avoid talking about their ability and encourage them to not talk about themselves in terms of I can't and I've got low ability, the growth mindset stuff, the assessment for learning stuff. If that's in place, then we help scaffold children towards that self-regulation. But there has to be sitting within that a degree of autonomy. And all of that together, the positive emotions, the sense of purpose, the strategies of self-regulation, lead to a sense of confidence and competence, which in turn go back and circle back to the positive emotions and filling that well of positive emotion. And it seems that these things working together are deeply important in terms of motivating learners. Now, I plucked a sentence out of the report here, which I thought was really important, particularly when we consider teaching adolescents. And I teach in primary and in secondary, and what I find is that a lot of primary teachers say, but they were so wonderful at primary school, and they go to secondary school and they're so bored and they're so this and they're so that, and they seem to have switched off. And their secondary teachers are like going, yeah, but they hit puberty and they change. And we all know that, don't we? One of the biggest impacts of puberty on children is the fear of losing face, the fear of embarrassment, and that embarrassment is most felt when they lose face in front of their peers. So children will not take responsibility for learning and not, work closely with a teacher or with their class if they have that fear present. And teachers have a responsibility there to create that foundation of trust. And that foundation of trust sits in collaborative practice, where children know each other and themselves and feel that they've got a sense of, cooperative respect with their teacher. So having laid all that out, I'm sorry it was a bit of a ramble, we just kind of wanted to think about how that links to the pedagogical approaches that Hywel and I take in the classroom and share some more practical examples with you. So I think we've just summed it up here, and I'll come back to this with sort of fancier words later on. But what we're trying to do when we approach learning in the classroom is to engage the whole child and the whole class. And Peter Hyman at School 21 talks about a head, heart and hand pedagogy. What he's referring to there is the idea that we engage children cognitively with knowledge and with thinking. We engage them emotionally in the affective dimension, and we've just talked about how important that is. We engage them practically and bodily in the psychomotor phase so that they are doing things and processing things with their bodies. And then this is one that I've kind of just added here because it's the importance of the social dimension of learning, and that's living in harmony with your class, living in harmony with your community and with the world. So how do we do that, and how do we allow children to access the possibilities in the world when perhaps the realities of their lives are slightly different? Hywel's going to tell you a story.
Yes, thank you. And there's a lot already to hopefully that's getting you to mull around. And can I encourage you, if you've got a comment or something you want to say, just put it into the chat and we can review it afterwards, and it'll help us with that follow-up session. We still work in classrooms, and need to make that plain. So we're not just thinking this stuff up. Well, we do think this stuff up, and we do the research, and we go into class and we model the pedagogies and practice in classrooms. And so the stories that we tell you now are based on things that have happened in class. And I'd like to just tell you about a school I visited in Sheffield. And I was invited in, and I think I've done some sort of training event at Twilight back in pre-COVID days when you weren't a Zooman, you were a human. I did something, and I got invited back, and basically the teachers said, "Oh, we've got this special group of kids that we've put together, and they're kind of year 2, year 3 children, and we've read a book together, and they've absolutely loved this book. So if you want to come in, share your work with us and, work with the kids." So that's exactly what I did. And the school was right. It was basically right on the edge of a big estate. And those of you who know Sheffield will probably recognise some of these places and the places I talk about. The tasks for the session I was doing, and teachers come in, it's like CPD on steroids. Teachers are coming in and watching as well, as if we haven't got enough on. the two tasks I had was quite simply, you can see them, that's a photo of from the actual day. And there's a mini roundabout there, just a humble, rough template of a mini roundabout. I can email that to you if you are lazy. And the second task, so the kids are going to make a bit of a map, and the second task there is they're going to get their whiteboards, this special group in this school, and they're going to finish this sentence. And just in case you can't quite see it, it says, "The city we are planning is amazing because we're city designers." Because I go into the kids and I'll say this to them: "Hey, we've been asked to redesign the city of Sheffield. Is this something we can do?" I nod at the kids, and when you nod at kids, Debs, they nod back.
Unless they're in year 9.
Unless they're in year 9, then they don't. They will not nod back. They'll just stare. But these kids, they're all nodding and saying, yeah. They're not saying, oh, actually, what are the fundamental qualifications to become a city designer? They're not asking me that. They're just, because I ask them and I nod, they say absolutely they want to be city designers. So, sorry. I'm just getting my head around this. So, there we are. And the first question is this. If we are going to have a fantastic new city of Sheffield, what new places are we going to drop into this fantastic new city? So together, you can see the kids are there on the carpet. Together, we start compiling a list of places. Now, the first response we get, a boy puts his hand up, and I say, go on, what amazing place are we going to have? And he says, a BP garage. And I'm like, okay, brilliant. Yeah, let's have a BP garage. So I write BP garage on the board. And the kids get wind of this then. So other hands start to go up. And I say, what are we having? And this little girl says, a Subway. And I'm thinking I'm hoping it's an underpass, but it's not. It's a sandwich shop. And I realise what's going on here. It's a sandwich shop inside the BP garage. So far in our fantastic new city, we've got a garage with a Subway in it. So I'm looking around and another hand goes up, little girl again. I said, go on then, what have you got? And she says, sorry, I start laughing now. She says, streakers. And I have to just look at the teacher, and the teacher says, it's the hairdressers. Right? So I'm like, all right. So I put hairdressers. I don't write streakers. And I discover then that what the children have actually done is if you can imagine them coming out of the estate where they live, they turn left and to walk to school, and it's a busy road, and they walk past a BP garage with a Subway built in. There's a couple of terraced houses, and the end one is Streakers Hair Salon. And then they turn left again, and they're in through the school gates. Now, just as a footnote to that, it makes me feel melancholic that when invited to imagine the world, their world, and I totally get it, their world is just what they know. They have, if you like, a little bit of street wisdom where they are, but they can't see beyond that. And if I just pull back for a minute and if we're thinking just for this moment about curriculum, the question there is our curriculum equipping our kids with some wisdom about the world? Just a thought. Now, they then get the maps and they start taking. We got a good list in the end because a kid said a zoo, and as soon as that happened, it just exploded. We had like ice rinks. We had a special area for helicopters to land. You know, the kids then, once the permission was given, they had a thought explosion. So they're adding details to the maps then. And then we did our little pictures on the whiteboards. And that girl in the bottom left, you'll love this. She just said, the city we are planning is amazing because We will all have hot tubs. I thought that was good. I want to go there. And I said, well, where will we have hot tubs? And she thought about it just for a moment and just said, oh, everywhere. So it makes shopping a little bit more interesting. So the kids were just now applying, if you like, the lists, applying a bit of imagination to those lists. They went to playtime, and when they came back, I'd taken their individual mini roundabout, and look, I know it looks like Milton Keynes, all right, but we created our city. And on our city, they detailed everything, and it looked really good. And when they walked in and saw that, there was that lovely little rush of exuberance walking in, because it was unexpected. It was like a little treat for them. Now, there's one boy in this class called James, and it must have been wet outside, because he did me the favour of walking in and walking right across the map with his wet feet, because he wanted to get into the top left there, because that was his map. And he said, Mr. Roberts, where does that road go? And I said to him, well, James, sit down, because I need to tell you. That goes to a part of the city we don't talk about until now. So the kids all sat down and they're ready to listen. And it's almost like, if it is a storybook, it's like we're starting a new chapter. And I said to the kids, there's an old abandoned factory. It's so old that people have forgotten what it made. Right at the end of that road, it was a huge, huge building. And once upon a time, I imagined, James, that this place, it would have been very, very busy. But now, there is nothing. James, look at the palm of your hand. And you can see in that wonderful picture that a teacher took, you can see that he's looking. He said he'd forgotten his phone. I said, don't worry about that. And I'm FaceTiming him. I said, James, I need you to get a team together. I need you to think about what equipment you're going to need, what skills you are going to need in order to go inside the old abandoned factory. Because you need to see if inside that factory there is anything worth saving. So essentially, we've moved from being city designers now to being some kind of relic salvagers, like modern Indiana Joneses. And I carried on talking to James, and as he's looking at his hand, he's also nodding now. I say to him, what you need to do first, after you've decided what you need to take in with you to bring things out of that old building that might be worth saving, I need you to get through the nettles and weeds first, because they are covering up the iron gates that you need to walk through. Now, at 8 o'clock that morning, Debs, I'd gone in and set something up. I'd put a big green sheet of paper up, and I'd written on the paper nettles and weeds. And I thought when the children came in, it would have been a bit of a fascinator, a bit of a hook. I thought they might be, I wonder what pedagogical approach the teacher is taking today, I wonder. They don't think that, do they? They just ignored it. But as soon as I mentioned it to James in the call, their eyes all started looking towards this sheet. Fast forward a few minutes, and we looked at the sheet, and we took the sheet down. We moved the nettles and weeds, because we all had our special gloves on. And when that sheet came down, there was another sheet underneath, which was a drawing of the old iron gates. Again, I'd put that up that morning. And the iron gates had the initials of the once famous factory owner emblazoned across them. And as soon as the children saw that, they made the connection. They suddenly were thrown back into the world of the book that they had been reading and that they had loved. And then, Debs, they went into a proper meltdown. And it went full meltdown, because they were suddenly realizing that Willy Wonka's chocolate factory was derelict. and they had a huge sense of injustice around this. The teacher grabbed my arm and said, "Do you need me to step in?" Because they were going crackers. And I said, "Are they being naughty?" And she said, "I don't know." But they calmed down. And you can see there's still some exuberance there. There's a group at the back there. There's kids who've got their night vision goggles on. We're all getting ready to go in. And I'm flashing my torch inside the old abandoned chocolate factory. And I'm just describing what I can see. And of course, then they get to go in. And when those children go in, you can see the children in the centre there. I hope you can see them. They are finding their way through the darkness. And the yellow post-it notes here are key. This is some writing that the children have done. They're writing. Because I asked them to shine their torches, and where the torchlight fell, they would write on the post-it note what they could see. And so on the right there, Chloe has written, "The everlasting gobstoppers tasted like dust." And the orange post-it note there, and I do love that picture, Debs, because that photo is a photo of the estate, and those kids are there looking at that orange post-it note, and you can see what it says. "The chocolate river has dried up. It is very sad. Why has this been allowed to happen?" That's written on the post-it note by one of these children. And I love that image. And suddenly we've got this word, transcendence.
Because we're not taking children into an area of relevance in the curriculum that limits their world to the one they already know. And sometimes teachers misunderstand that idea of relevance. Sometimes think, "Oh, we better teach a unit on Pokemon or on superheroes because these are things that are relevant to the children, or we'll do a unit on football." The point of relevance is making accessible the things that are unfamiliar to children, so that we put them into a situation where they can transcend their own experience and move into another world. And when those children are staring at that window, they're not staring at the estate they live on, they're staring at Willy Wonka's factory and wondering why in this amazing city the price of progress has been for Willy Wonka's factory to close.
Yeah, and also they're just, I mean, you can see it in this image. I hope that image captures it, actually. There's kind of this activity and movement, and this is just before we're finishing for lunchtime. There's a lot of activity and movement, and the talk is one of injustice and fairness. And actually, what do we do to stop this place from being, as it was going to be, demolished? All inside a fiction, of course, all inside the imagination.
And because what we're doing here is we're telling you stories about us telling stories to children in classrooms, because for us that's what brings the curriculum to life, and it breathes some life into what can be a cold dead document that Hywel's going to pick up on a little bit more detail later. The stories are important, not just to children in classrooms, and they're not just a useful device, and they're not just useful to primary classrooms either. But what we've found is that stories are now recognised amongst cognitive scientists as being psychologically privileged in the human mind. There's a really interesting article by Daniel Willingham that's called The Power of Story and the Privileged Status of Story. He's got another article on that. And in one of those articles, he gives the example of a secondary science classroom in which the fairly abstract concept for some children of planetary motions and planetary movements is presented to the children wrapped in the story of Galileo. And what they found in that research was that in the tests immediately after the content had been taught, there was one group that was taught just through exposition and explanation in a fairly traditional sense, and there was another group that was taught with the information wrapped in the story. In the test immediately afterwards, the story group outperformed the exposition group, but only by a small amount, not a hugely significant amount. But 3 months later, when they were tested again, the difference between those two groups had expanded and extended. And for some reason, the story had been more meaningful and memorable in the long term than simple explanation and exposition. So we know that it's important, and we know that there are aspects of story that seem to be capable of igniting the memory. Willingham pulls this from, really, he sort of steals it a bit from E.M. Forster.
Oh, yeah.
And because this is E.M. Forster's thoughts around the aspects of a novel, but what Willingham presents to us is that if we can find ways of incorporating these aspects of story into lesson planning, it seems to trigger memory in children. And the idea is that there are people, there are characters, there are complications within the story, so that things shift direction and you get multiple perspectives, which was, if you remember, was one of the things we talked about in terms of wisdom. There's a sense of chronology and causality in the idea that one thing leads to another, so there's a sequence, if you like. And then there are conflicts, there's tensions. And without that, we don't really have any drama, we don't really have any story. It's always tension that is the beating heart of the story. So with that in mind, when Hywel and I are planning sessions, whether it happens to be with Key Stage 4 or Key Stage 1, we're keeping this at the forefront of our minds, and we just use this as a bit of a helpful model. Who are the people? Where is this taking place? When is it taking place? What are the concerns, the problems, the dilemmas that are facing these people? And then what possibilities does the curriculum offer us in terms of taking those forward? And that's how we plait in our curriculum objectives, and we plait in our knowledge, because the knowledge is important in terms of finding the solutions and seeking alternative directions to the learning. And when we work in that way, we're doing more than just using story as an external motivator for learning. Christine Council's work around story refers to story as the hinterland, the thing that's external to the learning but enhances it. And she refers to ways that historians in particular can refer to the external story to pull in the knowledge that is necessary for history. I'd argue we can go further than that, and I think what Hywel and I are talking about when we do this work is the hitherland of learning. And I'll just go into that in a little bit more detail. This is just very quickly the results of that study, the science study that I mentioned from Willingham earlier. You can see that the red bar shows the improvement in performance from the blue bar. Both of the bars show how much better the groups who did story did from the baseline of 0, which was the baseline of the average point score of the exposition group. So we can see that that's quite a significant difference, and that was just using story as hinterland. That was just using story as the external to the information. Whereas I think what putting children into the story does, when they're walking through the story and the language shifts from they to we, they have to internalize it, and they have to emotionally and physically engage with that story. And what we manage to do then is to pull those 4 pedagogical principles into the story itself. So if we look at this, then we've got the affective dimension, which is the emotional dimension, the heart. We've got the cognitive dimension, which is the thinking and the processing and the knowledge. We've got the embodied dimension, which is the activity and the bodily activity. And then we've got the social dimension, the harmony, and that it's a collaborative enterprise and a shared exploration of the learning. And I think that's what the story offers us pedagogically if we pull it into the child's experience. So, sorry, let's go back one.
The alternative to all of this, we've talked now for 40 minutes, the alternative to all this thinking is to just do this, which is what you see on the screen, which is where we take children, we take them at the earliest ages, and we put them through a system where they are dragged through it. This is a picture of me teaching Seamus Heaney's agricultural poetry about his father to a year 10 class who were up for it, fair play, but they weren't that bothered. And rather than me try and think of lots of different strategies to hook them into these poems, I listened to Cal said to me, Sir, you just need to know, if I get a C, old money, I'll get a tattoo, the man said. And so I calmed down around the poetry, and I just told him everything that he needed to know. I practically wrote the notes for him. Do you know what I mean? I didn't, by the way. I didn't. But I practically did. I told him stuff, and he just wrote it all down. And that's dragging the kids through, I think. Now, there's some elements of the curriculum, and certainly elements of the curriculum in Key Stage 4, where we've just got to tell kids stuff, we've just got to tell them. But when we think about narratives and stories, I think we can also talk about design briefs and case studies at that level. The alternative to everything that we've shared is this, which is the pedagogy of poverty. And if you Google that, colleagues, it'll take you to a really good piece by someone called Martin Haberman. And he talks about schools that are going through the motions, basically, and where the experience of learning lacks richness. And as I hope you've gathered, we're not up for that. And I don't think, because you've tuned in tonight, I can't believe you'd be up for it either. What we're after is instilling in our children, I'm sure, a pedagogy of power. A pedagogy where, by the end of the day, the kids, they're going to feel like they've got something to say, like they can contribute. And just going back to Willy Wonka, of course, where we ended up going with that, or where the teacher ended up going with that when we sat down and planned what could happen next, it was all about making an approach to the council to stop the demolition of the factory. So the question there is, where's the curriculum? What curriculum are we tapping into, and how have we got there? Well, those kids haven't been dragged through anything. They've absolutely been immersed in a rich experience. Now, for all that to happen, we need our teachers to be bang on, don't we? We need, and as leaders, and we are aware of our audience here, we know that for you, you can believe everything that we've just said, but what's going to be important for you is the people in the classrooms. Ian Mentor, who we're quoting here, he was at Leeds, he's now at Oxford University, and he presented, if you Google him, you'll find this research online, but he presented this research at a conference, and this really is a model of, if you like, teacher effectiveness. And I found it really resonant, and it really made me reflect on my own practice. And we share this a lot now with school leaders, for school leaders to reflect on the teachers they've got in their schools, and perhaps working towards answering the question, what do my staff need? What's the CPD program look like that's going to support my teachers to be able to deliver a curriculum of richness, a pedagogy of power? If I just talk through these really quickly, when he describes the effective teacher, what Ian Mentor is talking about there is the teacher who can walk in a room as planned well and has the skills, the content, the ability to measure kids and to basically deliver a curriculum. They go in and they do it. Now, that sounds brilliant, and if you're watching this now, you're probably thinking, well, that's all we need. Well, Ian Mentor thinks there's more to it than that, and we agree with him. The effective teacher is great, but what about the reflective teacher? And if you like, this is the effective teacher with a second skin, and it's the skin of reflection. And what the reflective teacher does is everything that the effective teacher does, but they've got some values around them. They're values driven. They know the children in their classrooms. So they're not just planning a lesson. They've got year 8 all day. They've got 5 year 8s, and they're just doing the same thing 5 times. Actually, they're doing the similar thing 5 times, but they've tailored it for each class, because each class is different, and every kid in each class is different as well. So they're more reflective and more tuned in, if you like, than the effective teacher. And then Mentor offers us the inquiring teacher. And the inquiring teacher is doing everything. It's a third skin. And this teacher is doing everything the reflective and effective teacher's doing, but they're also, they're researching into their own practice. They're wanting to find out more. They're rocking up on a webinar. They're leading a webinar. They're going to a brewhead. They're doing a teach me. They're reading a book. They're writing a book about teaching and learning. They're wanting to find out more. And then the final skin, if you like, is the transformative teacher. And that teacher is doing everything else that the other teachers are doing, the inquiring, reflective and effective, but they're also looking beyond the classroom. They're not just seeing everything through the context of their own practice, they're looking at education as a global phenomenon. They understand, whilst doing that, they understand the social context that they're serving. And they have, if you like, what that does, if you like, is it gives that teacher a stance. It gives them a position and a view on what education is. And that informs the warming up of what could be described as a cold curriculum, a document. They bring life to that. So if the effective teacher is going in and doing it, and we're all kind of all right with that, the transformative teacher absolutely gets it. Now I've just spent some time explaining that to you. I'm hoping and we're wondering if you're thinking about your own staff then. What's happened, we think, certainly over the last few years, is that the effective teacher, number one on that list, has become the gold standard. And what we need to ask ourselves as leaders and people in charge of teaching teams is we need to ask ourselves, what are we going to do to build on that effectiveness? We really wanted to share that with you because we know that if we're going to have a successful curriculum, we've got to have the right people in the rooms.
And I think, we've talked about this a lot. At this current time, my heart breaks for training teachers and NQTs because they're not able to access the models, perhaps, of that transformative experience when we're all, having to COVID comply and we're absolutely overloaded. To be effective at the moment feels hard, never mind everything else. So I think we've got to kind of present this to you with a harsh dose of reality as well, that in this current time, to be putting a body in front of a class and to be able to get through that lesson is probably as much as many people can be coping with at the moment. But there is going to be a time beyond this time, and what we have to give those NQTs and those trainee teachers is a vision of the possibilities of the future, the hope on the horizon, if you like, because nobody went into teaching to be doing this.
No.
And the fact that people are still standing is quite remarkable. So we just wanted to kind of give you a way into one unit of work that worked for Year 5 and also worked for Year 7 and also worked for Year 9. Same dog, only washed, as Hywel would say it.
Yeah. I wanted to call this presentation that.
Did you?
Yeah.
I didn't let him. So we're going to start with the place. We talked about people, place, problem and possibility. And we're going to start with a place and a person inside that place. So just bear with me. Now, if I was looking at science on the Year 5 national curriculum, I'd see space on it. I'd see space and I'd see a few objectives, and I'd think I can probably cover that in a few lessons. If somebody said to me, you're going to do space for half a term, I might run away and find a few books and come back and put together, a bigger unit of work that covered a little bit more of the science. But I still wouldn't know really what the children A knew and already understood, and B, what they would be interested in learning. So in terms of shifting from the effective, where you might just take the national curriculum objectives, break them down, put out some worksheets, have some retrieval practice, test the children, and Bob's your uncle, this is what we did. Let's say we're in a bedroom. We're in a bedroom in 2030. Yeah, I know, that's in the future. We're in a bedroom in 2030, and standing in this bedroom is a young woman. She's 30 years old. When was she born? And quickly they come back. Okay. She's not spent much time in this bedroom. In fact, she's not slept in this bedroom for 12 years. And 12 years ago, she left home. How old would she have been then? The children are telling me she must have been 18. Okay, she was 18. You know what she did? She went to university. She went to university and she did a degree. Does anyone know anyone who's done a degree? And we gathered that information. And then she did another degree. She did a degree called a master's degree. The children are all going, oh, that sounds very impressive. And then, oh, no, she didn't stop there. She carried on. She did a doctorate degree, and now people call her doctor. And the children are getting more and more and more impressed. And she went to work in America, and she's got a very successful job. But here she is, standing in her old childhood bedroom. And do you know what's weird about this? It hasn't changed. Everything is exactly as it was. She's looking around the room, and the posters on the wall are the same as the posters that were on the wall when she left, and the books in the bookshelf are the same. Even her toys that she decided she was too old for and wasn't going to take to university because it'd be embarrassing, they're still there. And you know what, year 5, when my children went to university, I'd redecorated their bedrooms within about 2 weeks. Yeah, I did. I really did. So I wonder why some parents might not have changed their child's bedroom for 12 whole years. The children are fairly pointedly telling me that perhaps her parents loved her and were kind. And they talk about this idea of the bond between the child and the parents. And they also point out that perhaps she was an only child. So we're establishing a sense of a person and a sense of a relationship and this place. So the next task is to get the children enacting within that space. So we get Post-it notes and we start mapping out the space. So the children write on Post-it notes the things that they think we would find in this bedroom. What we're trying to build is a sense of a person's past, a sense of a person's history. So they're putting things like Star of the Week certificate from primary school, a gymnastics medal, and is she fit and healthy then? Yes, she likes sport. A picture of her dog on the beach on holiday, a picture of her prom when she left in year 11. And we have all these things around the room. And I add 3 of my own. I add a Post-it note that says an A-level physics textbook on her desk. I have a Post-it note that says a model of the solar system. And I have another Post-it note, which is a photograph of her and her granddad lying down in the grass in August, looking at the Pleiades shower. I never know if I pronounced that right, Pleiades. And I narrate the time, the memory of her lying with her granddad and her granddad putting his arm around her shoulders as they watched the shooting stars in the night sky, her earliest memory of really looking at the night sky. And he said, "Child, there's a whole universe to explore out there. We know hardly anything about it, and maybe you one day will find out more." So I've told the children this, and I think I've probably dropped enough hints by now for them to be getting their heads around the idea that there's something about space coming up in this unit of work. I then say to them that she's writing a letter. She's writing a letter, and the letter says this: "Dear Mum and Dad, by the time you get this, I'll be gone. I never was much good at goodbyes. Do you remember when you dropped me off at university and I didn't even turn round and wave at you? I wasn't being cruel. I just didn't want you to see me cry, and I don't want you to see me cry now because this is the hardest goodbye of all. I know I'll never see you again. I know you disagree with what I'm about to do, but I have worked so hard for this and so long for it, and the future of the human race is at stake." I stopped and I looked at the children and I said, "Oh, what have we just found out?" It's a comprehension task, isn't it? What have we just found out? Maybe you can ask her 3 questions. What would be a good name for this woman, do we think? They called her Mary. Okay, what would be a good name for, what do we think Mary is writing this letter about, and what do you think it is that she's about to do? What questions shall we ask her? So we sit down with year 5, and because they're children and fairly unpredictable, the first question is, "Mary, what was your dog called?" And I'm going, "Oh, Apollo. My dog was called Apollo." "Mary, what was your prom dress like?" And I'm thinking, oh, blimey. Okay. Yes, my prom dress was covered with sequins, so it glittered like 1,000 stars. But remember, you've only got one question left, and we really need to find out what's going on in this letter. Remember the letter. And thankfully they said, Mary, where are you going? And I said, we, and that's when you use the inductive language to shift from the they to the we are going to Mars. So then we had a few questions, didn't we? Because I said, something's bothering me about this letter. She says that we're going to Mars, and she says that we're a team, and, we're going to go there. But she says she's never going to see her mum and dad again. And I don't get that. And how long does it take to get there? It can't take that long, can it? So we stood on a time continuum, and the children estimated how long we thought it would take to get to Mars. And some were saying 10 years, 20 years. Some sort of, had about 5 or 6 years. But when we looked at NASA's resources, which are fantastic, by the way, we found out, we learned about elliptical orbits, which was one of the objectives on the national curriculum. We learned about elliptical orbits, and we found that Mars and Earth, when they're closest together within that orbit, you can probably get there within about 7 months, not much longer than 7 months. So I said to them, well, I don't see what the problem is. They can get there in 7 months. They can do whatever business they're doing on Mars. And then even if they have to wait for the planets to come round again, she's probably not going to be away for longer than she was at university. So, and her parents aren't that old, so what's the problem? The children are then scratching their heads and thinking, well, what is the problem? So one little boy said fuel. And I said, okay, so we'll just build a bigger rocket, won't we? If we haven't got enough fuel to get back, that's what we'll do. We'll just build a bigger rocket and put twice as much fuel in it. And he rolled his eyes and said, G-force. And at that point, I had stepped out of my subject knowledge, the realms of my subject knowledge. I'd heard of G-force. I had a feeling it was something to do with what happens to your face when you're on a roller coaster, but I really didn't know. And so I said, can you explain, which is a teacher's first fallback when they're out of their comfort zones. Can you explain that in a little bit more detail? And he said, yes. He said, if we increase the weight of the rocket, well, first of all, we probably won't get the velocity we need to get out of the atmosphere in the first place. And the G-force that's exerted on the rocket will be so great that it will probably disintegrate, and then we won't even make it to Mars. And I'm thinking, I have no idea whether that's plausible or not. It sounds very plausible. So I did what the second thing that teachers does when they're out of their subject knowledge constraints is I wrote a list of things we need to find out together. And at the top of that list was G-force. Is this a problem for us? And fuel. So my question then was, well, what other problems might we encounter? What other constraints might we encounter on this journey that might explain why she's fearful that we won't come back? And we're starting to pull the emotional in now, the fear, the grief of separation, the sacrifice. We're starting to talk about these things. So these are the lists of questions that the children came up with that might be other problems. We might not be able to breathe because they didn't know if there was enough oxygen. It might just be way too cold for us. And we looked at the temperature, the average temperatures of Earth and Mars. The average temperature of Earth is something around 14 degrees Celsius, but on Mars it's more like minus 60 degrees Celsius. So we were saying, well, if that's an average temperature, where are the hottest places on Earth, and does Mars have an equator, and would it be warmer there? We had to find these things out. Also, why do you think it's too cold? And they said because they thought it was further away from the sun, which is generally holds true as a rule, but is a slight misconception as well because it doesn't hold true for Mercury and Venus. So we had a look at that. They recognised that Mars was smaller, and some of the children knew that would impact on the amount of gravity, and then that would impact on our bodies. So we needed to find out some more about that. One child was asking about an ozone layer. Was there an ozone layer on Mars? Because if not, our skin would be susceptible to the sun's radiation and we might get cancer. And I was not expecting that either. That was, another left field contribution. One child was a little bit more philosophical and said, how will we stay sane on Mars? And I said, well, we're a team, we'll work together, I'm sure we'll find strategies for coping. And he said, no, if there's a shortage of food, we'll turn on each other soon enough, which led us to our next question of, well, what about food? What will we eat? And what can we grow on Mars? What's the composition of the soil on Mars? Why is the planet red? Does that mean the soil's red? And if the soil is red, what does it suggest that's inside the soil? And does that make the soil poisonous? As soon as we started talking about poisons and toxins, some of the children went to a previous unit of work that we'd done on exploration and how Western explorers and colonisers had brought diseases, bacteria and viruses to indigenous populations that they had no immunity to. So having learned that, they were using that knowledge here and thinking, well, there might be bacteria and viruses on Mars that we have no immunity to. We didn't know about the water supply. We looked at the pictures again and we thought there was probably ice on Mars, and we went back to the NASA resources, but we weren't sure if the water would be toxic given the high levels of CO2 in the atmosphere that we'd learned about. And then there was the question about, well, is there room for 7.5 billion people on Mars? And I said, well, why are you asking that question? And they said, well, that's how many people are on Earth. I said, well, yes, but we're not taking everybody. We're just taking the important people. That blew across the whole discussion. One child was very keen we were taking the Queen. I'm not sure she'd survived the journey myself. So when we did this with Year 7, we got very similar results. Hywel and I went up to Edinburgh, we were invited up to there, worked there for a few days, and we took this unit with us, and we got very similar questions and very similar opportunities to explore the science. But when I did the same scheme of work or supported a team doing the same scheme of work in a PRU in Oldham, and I'm sitting in a Year 9 class with children who've been permanently excluded from school, they were as engaged and asked similar questions about the science, but they brought their Year 9-ness to the table and asked things like, well, what if I get pregnant up there? And this child was, genuinely worried that the gravity would negatively impact on her ability to give birth and on the health of her baby. It was a genuine question. So we could pull in aspects of reproduction as we went there. One boy said, what are we after? And I said, what do you mean, what are we after? And he said, people on Earth don't spend money unless there's something in it for them. It was very cynical. He was basically anti-capitalist, which we're not allowed to talk about anymore. But he wanted to know what resources were going to be on Mars and who was going to profit from them. And then another child said, is this a race? They were referring back to the space race, but is this a race? Is this why we have to keep this mission secret? Are there other people trying to get to Mars? And obviously anticipating future conflicts that might exist on that planet. But ultimately, the science content stayed exactly the same. The other spin that happened in the PRU was the children had to interview their own astronaut team. They got an application that they had to read. They had to discuss who were the best applicants. They had to telephone a TA to break good and bad news about whether or not they'd been appointed, to try and get into the habit of articulating difficult conversations in a calm manner. And then, having fought quite hard for their particular astronaut to get a place on the team, they then were told that their astronaut would have to come in for a drugs test. We didn't do a real drugs test, but the possibility that you might apply for a job that you really, really wanted, and the final hurdle to getting it might be a drugs test, was of particular importance to the PHSE curriculum for some of these children. So you can see how, it's the same curriculum, effectively, framework, but it's adapted for the needs of the particular children that you're teaching it to. Now, having gone through the science learning, for Year 5, that went way beyond anything that's on Key Stage 2 curriculum science. It was getting into GCSE level of science in some points. Having gone through all this, we gathered as our team of astronauts, and we gathered ready to board our rocket, and we called a press release, and we announced the news that we were going. And then we are suddenly confronted with a problem. And our problem comes in the form of a man standing in front of the rocket with his arm chained to the rocket. And in his other hand is a sign that says, you don't get to go to one planet, you don't get to ruin one planet and then go to another. Take responsibility. And at the bottom it was signed XR 2030. And of course our next unit of work is around climate change, because what we wanted to explore was, why would it ever be necessary for human beings to have to move to another planet? because the human race is at stake if we go back to the original letter and focus in on that sentence. Now, that's a bit of a long-winded way of explaining to you how you can take something that feels dry, chemical composition of an atmosphere, what is oxygen, what's soil composition, those kinds of things, and breathe some life and purpose into them as we go.
And some of this, this work is about, I suppose, is about engagement. And there's a word for us all. How many learning walks have we done where we've gone into a classroom and we're just relieved to see that the children are engaged? And we tell the teacher, and the teacher's buzzing because they've got an engaged class. But we'd like to suggest that actually engagement is only part of it. I think, our teaching tells us, doesn't it, that most kids will come into school and will give us their attention. And that's what this slide is about here. Years ago, when I first actually started working with Debra, I was full-time in a secondary school where we were looking at how we could make our Key Stage 3 more attractive to the learners, if you like, to the children. There was a culture, if you like, of difficulty around motivation and engagement, and we wanted to do something about it. And Debra came in to work alongside us, and someone else who came to work alongside us as well was someone called Dorothy Heskett. And when she came to work with us, I'll tell you this, she was 80 years old when she walked in. One of my year nines said, "Sir, why have you brought your nan?" Which was quite funny. And at the end of the session, she said, "Hywel, what do you want for your curriculum? What do you want? Why are you changing things?" And my response, our response was, we just want the kids to engage more. And what she did then was talk this. She talked this, and we've written it down for you. She is the person who said that most kids will give you their attention. And what we do as teachers, and what your teachers will do, is then work very hard to get kids interested by using perhaps a hook or a really good, in the Peru we use settlers, just to get the kid in the frame of mind ready to do some stuff. We then apply appropriate tasks and appropriate strategies, and the kids get on with stuff. And that's when they're engaged. But then what we need to do, and what Dorothy Heskett suggested, and this is a real driver for our work, is that she suggests that engagement is only part of the story. There's a world beyond it. But to get to that world, you've got to cross a bridge. And that bridge is one of concern. So we need to get the kids bothered about something, concerned about something. And the way Debra's done that when teaching science and a mission to Mars is to actually look through the lens of an astronaut leaving the planet for a really big world, universe-changing mission. That's the concern. And if you like, the science, the knowledge richness has been wrapped around this narrative. And it's the narrative, as Willingham, who we quoted earlier, tells us, that's what hooks the children in. It enables that investment. And kids in your classrooms every day are investing. It's just that we don't call it that. We just always call it engagement. But actually, this is engagement plus. This is engagement plus knowledge. We're getting away from that idea of engagement just being a class where kids are busy and compliant and just meeting expectations around manners. When they're invested, there's some solid, good learning experiences going on. An obsession, which Heskett talked about, is where actually kids are absolutely buzzing about what they're doing. When I was teaching English, I remember a class of year 11 I had. There were 3 lads there. They were only obsessed about football, and I made it my goal, if you pardon the pun, to get them obsessed about English. I don't think I ever achieved it, but in PE, I bet they were an absolute dream. They were obsessing all the time. But I think for us and for our colleagues, what we're talking about is how do we get the kids across to investment? And that, if we want the kids to be independent, they need to be invested. Independence isn't fostered by kids just following instructions, doing the bit of task work and then saying, what do I do now? And just being little task machines. That's dependency. And we want kids to be independent, don't we?
So very quickly, before Hywel finishes us off, I don't think finishes us off.
We have to love you completely.
Came across rather negatively. Before Hywel finishes, I just wanted to share this example with you, because this is when I was teaching in secondary, and it was a year 8 experiment, if you like. It sounds a little bit bad, but experimenting on children. But some of us, I was in the English department, some of us were thinking, how can we pull some cross-curricular work together without having to rewrite the whole flipping curriculum? And we just wanted to try out a few ideas. So there were a few volunteers who stepped forward from maths, science and English. We wanted it to be a core subject project. And we started, and not everybody wanted to do it. So we ended up, by happy accident, not by design, with a control group of kids who were just going to go to maths, English and science as usual and get the usual diet of the scheme of work, and some kids that were going to come to this way of doing it. And we started off just sitting around a table scratching our heads, and we asked the question, what do we do in our subjects at this time of year? And maths said, well, we're looking at data handling. Science, we're looking at waterborne diseases in particular, disease generally, but waterborne diseases at that moment in time. And English, we had that kind of skills-based approach where we were writing to instruct and writing to persuade, so pretty much we could write about anything we wanted. So we asked the next question, which was, what's happening in the world right now where somebody would need to know about waterborne diseases and to be able to communicate it either through data or through the written word. And what had happened a few months before was the earthquake in Haiti. And the World Health Organization at this point in time had issued a warning that there was a catastrophic humanitarian crisis unfolding in Haiti because of the rainy season. So there were about 1 million refugees still displaced, living in conditions like this, and the rainy season was coming, and for the last few months those refugees had been building latrines up the hillside because they had no toilets and they had no sanitary facilities. So I can leave the rest to your imagination. And so what we did was we set the year 8 classes up that were working in this way as trainee aid agency workers who had to respond to this humanitarian crisis and find a way of communicating to the people on the ground the problem that was about to be created. When they came to English, they were at a PR agency that was training them in the techniques to communicate this information. When they went to maths, they were at the Office for National Statistics being trained in the data handling they'd need to communicate the information. And when they went to science, they were at the Centre for Disease Control, and they were the scientists learning about waterborne diseases so that they'd know which information to communicate. So the maths and English were the vehicles of communication, but the science was the content. We noticed these things very quickly. There was elevated language being used. The children started to use that Tier 2 and Tier 3 vocabulary, and if they didn't know it, they asked for it because they wanted to sound like professional adults. Their behaviour shifted. They said they started managing each other's behaviour. I noticed in one of my classes a couple of boys were bubbling up and messing around, and somebody turned around, one of the girls turned around to them and said, "Stop being unprofessional. We're Skyping the UN in half an hour and we need to crack on." And suddenly they refocused, and I hadn't had to step in at all. There was clear investment from the children. They wanted to stay at break, they wanted to stay after lunch, they wanted to stay after school, they wanted to work on this. They came to me and said, "It's not good enough this, just learning about it in a story. We want to raise money for the people in Haiti because this is real." And they did. They put on a performance and they raised £3,000 for the refugees in Haiti. Their attitudes to school changed. And their own individual performance changed. So in the end of unit tests that the whole year group sat, regardless of whether they'd done it this way or another way, these two groups outperformed the rest. Accounting for starting points and so, controlling for that, they outperformed the rest, which meant they got put into higher sets in year 9 and continued to outperform because they lived up to the expectations of those higher sets. And so their performance continued through to their GCSEs. And their attitudes to school changed. So in the year after, in year 9, there were teachers coming up to us saying, we can tell which children were part of this project because they've just got so much more of a positive attitude to school. So it's quite significant, and it's just a really small snapshot of how what was a relatively small change. We didn't have to rewrite the curriculum particularly. We just repositioned our stance, as Hywel was saying earlier, had this massive impact on the children.
Okay, so honestly, we're sitting here and we're just hoping this is useful, and we're going to get towards the end of it now. Just with another narrative, really, just another example from the body of work that we do, and I'm thinking now about Vikings. Now, if you've heard us speak before, I'm pretty sure you've heard this story before, but it's worth telling, and it's only a few minutes, and it's worth telling because it paints the right picture, I think. In Manchester, there's 2 schools. One school I describe as a very warm school. When you go in, you get a decent brew. You get a decent coffee if that's what you want. That's what I want. And you get a really nice coffee. I'm not saying it's filtered, but it's good. And when you go through the airlock, through reception, and you've typed your car engine and stuff, you then see the children, and they're all, they're all great, the kids, and it's busy. There's a good cacophony of business going on all around, and the adults look very busy, very, very tired and cracking on. But there's a really good warmth there, which is why I say it's a warm school. Now, down the road, literally, I could park at the warm school and get down to the cold school, which is down the road. I could just walk there. When you go there, they give you a lukewarm mug of Maxwell House, as if it's the 70s. And you meet Joy on reception, who probably needs to go on a course. And you get through the airlock there, and you see the kids. And the kids are the same as the kids up the road, because these 2 schools serve the same massive community just on the edge of the city centre. The teachers are the same as the teachers up the road, but these teachers, as well as looking a bit tired and busy and everything, they look a bit harried. That's a word, isn't it? They're a bit cowed. They've got enough on. In fact, I'd say they've got too much on. Now, what's happened is the leadership of the cold school has reached out to the warm school and said, could you come and give us a hand with a few things? And so that's what's happened. It's an informal sharing of ideas. The Senko, the experienced Senko from the warm school, travels to the cold school and meets the RQT, who is now the Senko, at the cold school. And this sort of exchange, best CPD ever, a brew and a conversation with an experienced colleague. That's what's been set up. And one of the things I'm asked to do is just to go down to the cold school and just check out a lesson. So I go in to a classroom and I can see just from the walls, well, as soon as I walk in, there's a queue of kids. They all start lining up with their topic books because they're showing me their books. Because I've got a suit on, they think it's a book scrutiny, and they've proper been trained. They're straight up and I'm having a look through the books, and they've got a load of stuff about Vikings stuck in there. It's all Vikings, everything's Vikings. And I say to the teacher, what are we doing today? And she says, we're doing Vikings. And I'm like, oh, great. And just as we're about to carry on, a TA emerges from one of those walk-in stock cupboards. I don't know how long she'd been in there. I've been in there 15 minutes. She came out with a stationery tray, a trolley, and on it was like pens, scissors, coloured pencils, glue sticks, the works, proper nice expensive card, everything. But weirdly, there was also a massive bowl of glitter. And when I looked at that, it caught my eye, and it was like watching the opening 10 minutes of Casualty. Do you know when you see someone climbing a tree with a chainsaw and a cup of coffee, and you think, something bad's going to happen here? That's what I thought when I looked at that bowl of glitter. So I looked back at the teacher and I said, well, what are we doing today? And she said, we're making a Viking shield. And I asked a really important question then. Why? And she looked at me and said this, and I knew that she knew that I knew. She said, because it's week 3, and if we don't get this done in week 3, I don't know when we're going to do it. We're going to run out of time. And I was very sympathetic then in that moment, because I get that. And as you're listening to this, I'm pretty sure you get that too. What you got there is a teacher being of service to the curriculum rather than the other way around. In the Warm School up the road, we've set it up totally differently. We've set up the idea that there's mountains, there's rivers, there's trees. We've sketched out this map, and we've come up with the idea, the narrative, the people in a place. We are Vikings arriving at a new place to settle where we can farm. And I say to the kids, there's a cave up there. It's called Dragon Cave. What's that mountain called? What would Vikings call that mountain up there? What would they call their river? And the kids go and research Viking names, Viking ideas, Viking gods, Viking culture, Viking mythology. That becomes, if you like, our content. And it's helpful. It protects the children into thinking about Vikings. Week 2, the second week, we think about Viking buildings. We think, and the kid says, we're going to have a Viking school. And I said, what are we going to learn in it? And he just looked at me and said, Bear Grylls. And I went, I know what you mean. What does that mean? And he said, fishing. And I said, where do we get fish hooks from? And he said, from the claws of lions. And I didn't know what to say then. So he said, do you want me to show you? And he just did this little piece of dramatic movement where he pulled a claw out of the lion and went fishing with it. It was great. He was called Zach. He was engaged. But do you know what? He was absolutely invested, that kid. Week 3 in the other school, with the glitter and everything, kids are just sitting there. They're busy. They're engaged, like we were talking about before. They're cutting out shields that they've designed based on a test PowerPoint, which was all right. The PowerPoint was good.
Effective.
It's effective. It's very effective. But there was a lot of wastage on the floor, and there was 3 lads just nicking the glue sticks. I watched them do it, bless them. And then there was one kid who was just cutting everyone off. He'd already got a glue stick, put it on his eyebrows, put it round his mouth, and he put his face in the glitter bowl and was running around bothering everyone. And the TA just totally lost it, and she was going, Gary, come here. And I just thought, Gary covered in glitter, Gary Glitter. Which I was saying, no, it's not appropriate, but I was just chuckling about it in my head. It's one of those crazy things you see when things are kind of on the edge in a classroom. And back in the Warm School, we realised that we had a few issues of something going on in the mountains, so we had to go and explore. And when we went to explore, we found that in the cave there was a dragon, and we realised we needed, in order to live with it next to this dragon, we'd have to really have a good conversation with it and negotiate a way of living. And when I asked them, what do we need to make sure we take with us when we go to see the dragon? The kids said, we need to take shields. And that's when we started talking about Viking shields. And suddenly the purpose was absolutely brimming up to the surface.
What I noticed about that as well was that your Zach, who had form.
Yes, he did.
And your Gary, who had form.
Gary Glitter.
From the same area.
Yeah.
Are probably very similar kids, but because one has a sense of purpose, they're channeling that energy in a positive way.
Yeah.
And the other one's not.
I think if you lifted Gary up and popped him into the warmer school, he'd have been all right. And I think if you picked the teacher up as well, that they would have been better off as well. The thing was, when we looked at the planning, because basically both schools were following a very similar curriculum around Vikings. Week 6, the big task in books was write a Viking saga. And I mean, I don't think we need to dwell on this too much. I think we all know where the best Viking sagas will have been written. They'll have been written where, in the place where actually the kids had started thinking about storytelling and sagas in week 1, when they were thinking about the setting and drawing the maps and so on. We've kind of rushed through that towards the end just to try and stick with time. We're hoping there's lots of questions to ask now. We've sat and we're very grateful for you giving up your time tonight, and there's a lot of you turned up, and thanks so much for that. Don't forget, on the 30th of November at 4 o'clock, we're going to be back here, and we're just going to be answering any questions you care to put. Maybe you've put some in the chat. We've not been monitoring it. Just email Paul with some of those questions, and that'll help us come up with, if you like, the content. We don't really want to spend another hour just telling these great stories that we've got. We'd much rather be responding to what you're thinking. And the other thing that we both hope is that you've seen, if you like, we've talked a lot about classroom practice there, and that's the core business, and that's the thing that hopefully we'll get back to normal. We'll recognise it again, so it all won't be in a state of kind of reactionary panic like maybe it has been in some schools.
Yeah.
Go on.
I think when we come back for that follow-up session, that's your chance to throw challenges at us. It's your chance to say, "Oh, this is very nice, but what about this? How do you do that?" So please feel free to offer those challenges. We're not precious, and we're not going to go, "Well, Hywel might go away and cry."
I'm very good.
I'm quite robust. If any of you know me on Twitter, you'll know that. So I'm quite happy to answer those questions. We're quite happy to answer those questions and take that forward.
Yeah.
And we'll just come back to Paul now, if that's okay.
Oh, thank you so much. It was brilliant. It was very entertaining. I've heard the Gary and the glitter story many times, but it always makes me chuckle. So thank you, and thank you to you for attending today. I know everyone's got very busy schedules, and thank you for everything that you're doing each and every day for our children in schools. We really appreciate it in these really challenging times. You've been really shy with the questions. We do need your questions for the next session. So please email me. Can you just click on a slide for me, please, Deborah? Here's a reminder of my email address for your questions. But also, if I can help you, support you with recruitment or the wellbeing platform or the training platform or the wellbeing report. So once again, thanks to everybody, and send us your questions. And we will close then and say good evening to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.